Welcome to Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. I'm Peter Gross, co-host of the original Wild Kingdom with Marlin Perkins and Jim Fowler. When Wild Kingdom aired in the 1960s and 70s, many episodes documented wildlife research efforts. Marlin and Jim accompanied scientists all over the world to observe animals and their natural behaviors. Some of the techniques you'll see in tonight's episodes are no longer necessary by today's standards, but the work is still just as important. Wild Kingdom took viewers to the far corners of the world and cultivated an appreciation for animals and their habitats. Marlin and Jim showed us the importance of preserving the natural world, not just for animals, but for our quality of life. And that's good news for all of us in the Wild Kingdom. So sit back and enjoy Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom right here on RFD-TV.
Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom is presented by Mutual of Omaha, the people who pay.
Welcome to Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. In all this world, there are only a handful of places left which can truly be termed a sort of paradise. One of these is located about 600 miles off the coast of South America, a chain of islands which belongs to Ecuador. These are the Galapagos Islands, and here there is a pristine and primitive beauty that is unique in our world today. Since man is not a predator on these islands, there is virtually no fear of him among the unusual animals living here. Wildlife of the land, sea, and sky can be approached and observed with great ease. Flamboyantly colored Sally Lightfoot crabs move about ceaselessly in and out of the water. Farther inland, land iguanas roam casually. All around are the albatrosses, which, whether perched or wheeling gracefully above, exemplify the unblemished freedom from fear which always prevails here. Recently, I visited these marvelous islands for the first time and experienced that rare sense of finding a true paradise on earth. I was wholly enchanted by it, and that's why we call our story Voyage to the Isles of Enchantment. The long journey aboard the Cathjar from the mainland of Ecuador is behind us. We've entered the island chain now, and the Galapagos are all around us. 13 major islands are here, and scores of smaller ones. All of them formed eons ago through volcanic action. Most of the islands are relatively small, like the one we're passing now, and it's on one of these smaller islands where we'll land first. We've arrived at Bartholomew Island, just offshore from the much larger Santiago Island. Studying the wildlife isolated here, Charles Darwin developed his revolutionary theory of evolution. With the Cathjar riding at anchor, Tom Allen and I will make our landings on this island in the smaller boat, taking care to find places to come ashore where the jagged volcanic rocks in the water are not so numerous and tidal currents not so severe. The Galapagos lie directly on the equator, but yet they can't with justification be called tropical islands. Both the water and air are cooled considerably by the Humboldt current sweeping past on its way from the Antarctic. This is one of several reasons why the animals evolved so differently here from those on truly tropical islands at the same latitudes. We've located a perfect beaching site here in one of Bartholomew's quieter bays, and Tom will stay with the boat while I begin some observations. It is somehow quite appropriate that the first wild animal I detect is a Darwin finch, named after the great scientist whose writings brought fame to these islands. The unique attraction of these islands becomes evident right away as I encounter a yellow-crowned night heron. Not in finding a heron here, there are many, but in seeing that it shows absolutely no fear of me. Here, man is not regarded by the animals as a threat, but as an object of curiosity. Even the normally wary frigate bird has come to take a close look. Although I've been in primitive places all over the world, and certainly in many areas of wilderness as scientifically breathtaking as these Galapagos Islands, I've never before entered any portion of the wild kingdom so unaffected by man's influence. One suddenly feels awed and humbled, as if glimpsing what the earth was like before the disruptive appearance of man. Usually the night heron is nocturnal, but here he boldly stalks the ghost crab in broad daylight, unafraid of interruption, intent only upon the object of its hunt. And the crab, aware of its peril, raises its eyes as high as possible on protruding stalks and studies the enemy. The yellow-crowned night heron knows there is little chance of catching the ghost crab if there's a hole nearby. Wisely, the heron's first move is to break off the dangerous pincers. As curious about the Galapagos wildlife as I am, I'm discovering that some of the inhabitants are equally curious about me. Wholly unafraid, these mockingbirds seem to find something fascinating about the shoes I'm wearing. With such tameness among these and other animals of the islands, the introduction of new predatory species, either by design or accidentally, could be disastrous. There, near the far shore, in one of the lagoons formed by volcanic action, is one of the most colorful and rarer bird species. They're flamingos, similar to the West Indian flamingo, and in all the islands of this archipelago, there are only about 500 of them. Their wading and feeding habits are not unlike those of flamingos found elsewhere in the world. Long-legged and awkward appearing at rest, in flight they are powerful and graceful birds, always a delight to behold as they move from one feeding site to another. There are other animals to see and other islands to visit. So it's time now for me to head back to where we beached the boat and where Tom has been awaiting my return. From what I've observed here on Bartholomew Island, it is very clear to me now how a scientist could gladly spend months or even years in a close study of the wildlife in such an isolated and primitive paradise. I'm eager now for our next stop, which should provide some close observation of animals even more fascinating than those we've seen here. We're heading back to our big boat, the Cathchar, to go to Española, or Hood Island, which is one of the southernmost of the Galapagos chain, and which is about 10 miles long. The journey in the Cathchar to the next island we wanted to visit did not take long, and as we came ashore in the small boat, we found it quite a change. As we approach Hood Island, we can see that it's much larger than Bartholomew, but the topography is different. It isn't formed by a volcano like the others, but rather is an uplifted block of submarine lava. One of the principal reasons why I wanted to come here is because we learned that the courtship activities have just begun among some of the bird species which nest on the ground on this island. Our timing has been just right. There's a fine male blue-footed booby beginning its unusual dance. The female seems so impressed that she joins him in the slow, high-stepping strut, which encourages him to an even greater effort to display what a fine figure of a bird he is. A short walk inland, and I'm able to approach closely 3 waved albatrosses. These are the largest flying birds in the Galapagos, with wingspans of up to 8 feet. Unafraid, 2 begin rubbing bills in a courtship action as if I weren't here. The third has trouble judging distance in settling over her egg. This odd behavior with the beaks has been described as bill fencing, and it's an important part of the courtship, since it appears to strengthen the bond of devotion which develops between the pairing birds. Hard to say why, but the third albatross just can't seem to solve her problem. Not that it makes much difference to her neighbors. Well, perseverance has its reward. I'll leave these birds to their courtship and incubation activities and see what other species are doing. There's some distant movement ahead of me, which turns out to be a large colony of birds on the rugged rock cliffs overlooking the sea. They're obviously resting now during the midst of day from their morning feeding. These are the white boobies. They're larger than blue-footed boobies and are also known as masked boobies because of their black face feathering. Though proficient in flight, like this female coming in to her nearly full-grown young, they're not so successful as parents. Though they regularly return with fish they've caught and partially digested, the demands of the immature birds are more than the adults can fill. As a result, although 2 eggs are always laid and hatched, 1 chick weakens and dies. The one that does survive takes every morsel the parent can provide and is seldom content with that. Like many other seabird and wading bird species, the only place they can't preen themselves is on the neck, so mutual neck preening becomes a regular pastime. This island also has some substantial growths of rather tall opuntia cactus trees, and one of the more impressive wild animal species is usually found in their vicinity. So it's no surprise to see one right away, a land iguana. Having encountered iguanas elsewhere in the world which flee instantly, It's an amazing thing to see such incredible unconcern as this one exhibits, and it's a distinct treat to be able to observe it at such close range in the wild. Others are nearby, including a large male who is very belligerent. As I move closer to them for a better look, it seems impossible to me that one could ever have such an encounter as this with a wild animal. Nor does it seem that my coming closer to the group has made them alter their behavior one iota. These land iguanas enjoy basking in the sun and are entirely vegetarian, feeding on sedges, grasses, shrub bark, and the fruits and leaf pads of cactus, which they swallow, spines and all. It's time now that I leave the lizards and the gracefully soaring albatrosses of Hood Island and get back to our boat. There's yet another island on which we want to observe wildlife before we leave this unique microcosm of zoological history. It is the third largest of the Galapagos chain, Fernandina Island. Marine iguanas and Sally Lightfoot crabs were two of the species we wanted to observe, and we soon discovered that they were plentiful on Fernandina Island. Fernandina Island, we find, is topographically different from the two we've already visited. It is approximately round and 10 miles in diameter, with a large active volcano in the center. Our landing is not especially difficult, but as protection against the rough lava, Tom raises the motor. As I set off to make some more solitary observations, he decides to stay and observe the activities of the numerous sea lions in this area. Even the sea lions show curiosity, but no semblance of fear as they watch. Not far from the sea lions are the first marine iguanas I've seen here. They're about 3 feet long, somewhat shorter than the land iguanas, but equally fearsome in appearance. They're the only lizards in the world that feed on marine algae and live in the intertidal zone, which they share with the brilliantly colored Sally Lightfoot crabs. The Sally Lightfoot crabs also eat algae, constantly picking about on the rocks, as well as bits of carrion from dead fish or other animals when available. They live in relative harmony with the marine iguanas, even though they eat the same food. But the iguana's size is enough to make them at least stay out of his way. They're one of the more brightly colored crabs in the world and can be found on the rocky shores of all the islands here. Little interrupts their feeding. The sea lions here are no threat to either the crabs or the iguanas, which after long immersions sit and spit salt water. The salt water they spit is ingested with the algae they eat underwater. Besides sea lions, lizards, and crabs, many birds live here, including the graceful swallowtail gull, one of only 2 gull species which breed in the Galapagos. Oddly enough, the swallowtail gull feeds only at night, flying far out to sea in search of surfacing squid and fish. A very handsome bird, it seems to underline the essence of pre-man freedom which prevails here as it soars expertly about the sea cliffs. Watching these animals continue their activities as if I weren't even here is a special sensation I've never experienced so completely anywhere else before. And I can understand why it enchanted Charles Darwin. One of the most unusually adapted birds of these islands is the flightless cormorant. Without enemies from which to flee, these seabirds have lost their power of flight and their wings have become rudimentary. The brilliant turquoise-colored eye is almost unique among birds, and the plumage is fur-like. Carrying seaweed in the beak is the male's signal that he's ready to begin courtship. There are only 800 pairs of these birds left in the world. One of the most thrilling sights to witness in the Galapagos is the feeding habits of the blue-footed boobies. From relatively high altitudes, they arrow into the water after fish, wings folded back. They circle over schools of fish, select their particular prey, and dive. Frequently, they do this in group movement, which is a rare action among birds. Such a picture of wild splendor, of nature in its purest form, leaves an unforgettable impression. And it's with great regret that I finally leave these Isles of Enchantment. It was in 1959, after 25 years of partial protection, that the entire Galapagos archipelago was declared a national park under the Ecuadorian Forestry Service. Now, with full protection afforded them, some of the rarest animals in the world are being preserved from possible extinction through the greed or carelessness of man. These animals may continue to swim, run, or fly with the same unfettered freedom that they have enjoyed for centuries, because great effort is being made to protect not only the animals themselves, but equally the habitat in which they live. At last, man has begun to recognize the importance of his responsibility in maintaining the balance of nature, even though it may be in one of the most remote corners of the wild kingdom.
Mutual of Omaha, the people who pay, has presented Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom.
Mutual of Omaha, helping people find Medicare solutions for over 50 years. To learn more about plan options or how to protect your kingdom, contact us today.
Mutual of Omaha. Protect your kingdom.